of witness tampering and intimidation, murder, money laundering, and drug trafficking.
At 11:47 a.m. on a Friday morning that would redefine cross-border law enforcement cooperation, FBI Director Mitchell Calloway stood behind a podium in Washington, D.C., and delivered a statement that sent shockwaves through both American and Mexican intelligence communities. Operation Iron Curtain had just concluded its primary phase. $220 million in misappropriated disaster relief funds had been recovered from a fortified compound in Tijuana, Baja California. 37 cartel operatives were in custody. And the man who had transformed an entire city into a narcotic superhighway while wearing the badge of Democratic office was now sitting in a federal holding cell, stripped of immunity, stripped of power, stripped of the illusion that had protected him for nearly 8 years. His name was Hector Villarreal. To the citizens of Tijuana, he was Mayor Villarreal, the charismatic leader who promised infrastructure improvements and economic revitalization. To the FBI, DEA, and Homeland Security investigations, he was Asset November 7, the highest-ranking municipal official ever confirmed to be operating as a direct command node for the Tijuana cartel's border smuggling empire. And to the families on both sides of the border who lost loved ones to fentanyl poisoning, to the communities devastated by methamphetamine floods, to the human trafficking survivors who passed through his city in steel containers and refrigerated trucks. He was something far darker. He was the architect of industrialized suffering disguised as public service. This is not a story about one corrupt politician. This is a story about how a drug empire purchased an entire municipal government, rewired its police force into a private security battalion, and turned federal disaster money into cartel operating capital. And if you think this is as bad as it gets, you have no idea what they found in the basement levels of that compound. The operation began not in Tijuana, but in San Diego. At 4:17 a.m. on the morning of the raid, special agents from the FBI's Cross-Border Criminal Enterprises Task Force assembled in a secured parking structure 3 blocks from the international border crossing. The fog rolled in thick from the Pacific, turning streetlights into blurred halos of amber and white. 46 agents in tactical gear moved with the practiced silence of operators who understood that the next 6 hours would either dismantle a cartel command structure or trigger a firefight that could escalate into an international incident. They were joined by Homeland Security investigations units, DEA special response teams, and a liaison cell from the Mexican Secretariat of National Defense, who had been cleared at the highest levels of both governments. This was not a unilateral American strike. This was a coordinated takedown authorized by presidential directives on both sides of the border, built on 2 years of covert investigation, financial tracking, and intelligence gathering that had penetrated deeper into cartel municipal collusion than any operation in modern history. At exactly 4:32 a.m., when 6 separate strike teams crossed into Tijuana through prearranged corridors. They moved on the mayor's compound first, a sprawling estate in the hills overlooking the city that officially belonged to a ghost corporation, registered in the Cayman Islands but was known to every cartel operator in Baja California as the mayor's palace. The property had 12-foot walls topped with surveillance cameras. Private security contractors patrolled the perimeter in shifts. Armored SUVs sat in the circular driveway. And inside, according to intercepted communications, Mayor Villarreal was hosting a late-night strategy session with senior cartel logistics coordinators. The breach was textbook precision. Flashbangs detonated simultaneously at 3 entry points. Doors reinforced with steel plating came down under hydraulic battering rams. Agents poured through the smoke and chaos, weapons raised, voices overlapping in Spanish and English, commanding everyone to the ground. Security contractors froze, recognizing federal tactical gear and the futility of resistance. Cartel members in the main salon dropped encrypted phones and tried to scatter toward back exits that were already sealed by second-wave teams. Mayor Villarreal himself was found in an upstairs office, sitting calmly behind a desk of polished mahogany, hands folded, watching the raid unfold on a bank of security monitors. He did not resist. He did not protest. He simply asked in perfect English if the agents had coordinated this action with the appropriate authorities. The lead agent, a 22-year veteran named Sarah Medina, looked at him and said the appropriate authorities are the ones putting you in handcuffs. They seized his phones, his laptops, his tablets, and 3 external hard drives hidden inside a false panel behind a bookshelf. They found 2 handguns, one with the serial number filed off. They found $73,000 in cash bundled in a desk drawer. But the real discovery came when agents descended into the compound's lower levels, areas that did not appear on any official building permit or architectural plan. The basement was not a storage area. It was a command center. Wall-mounted monitors displayed live feeds from cameras positioned along the border. at truck depots, at warehouses, and inside what appeared to be tunnel entrances. A central table held maps marked with routes, timing schedules, and coded identifiers. And in a climate-controlled room behind a locked steel door, agents found something that made even the most experienced investigators pause. Stacks of bundled U.S. currency. 50, 70, 100 stacks deep. Bills organized by denomination, wrapped in bank-issued paper bands, filling industrial shelving units from floor to ceiling. The count took 4 hours. The total came to $220 million. And here's where the story turns from cartel corruption into something that strikes at the heart of international aid and government accountability. Every single dollar in that room had been traced back to disaster relief funds allocated by the United States federal government following a series of earthquakes and hurricanes that devastated the Baja California region 3 years earlier. Funds meant for rebuilding homes, repairing water systems, and supporting displaced families. Funds that passed through a labyrinth of contractors, shell companies, and municipal accounts that all led back to Mayor Villarreal's network. And funds that never reached the people they were meant to help. While the compound raid unfolded, simultaneous operations hit cartel nodes across Tijuana. At 4:41 a.m., DEA agents stormed a warehouse complex near the Otay Mesa border crossing that had been operating as a distribution hub for methamphetamine and fentanyl pills. The building's exterior looked like a legitimate freight logistics company. Inside, agents found 3,000 kilograms of crystal methamphetamine packaged in vacuum-sealed bricks, 2.1 million fentanyl pills pressed to look like legitimate pharmaceuticals, and 600 kilograms of powdered fentanyl stored in industrial drums labeled as agricultural fertilizer. The street value exceeded $400 million. At 4:55 a.m., a joint FBI and ICE team breached a residential property in the Zona Norte district that intelligence had identified as a human trafficking way station. They found 14 women and 6 children locked in reinforced rooms with barred windows and deadbolt exterior locks. Medical personnel on standby moved in immediately. Translators worked to calm the victims, most of whom were Central American migrants who had been promised safe passage to the United States, but were instead held in captivity, exploited, and prepared for forced labor or sex trafficking networks. The property's owner was a shell entity. The actual operator was a cartel lieutenant whose encrypted messages to Mayor Villarreal confirmed municipal police had been ordered to avoid the address during patrols. At 5:12 a.m., a SWAT team entered a luxury restaurant in the Zona Rio district, a high-end establishment frequented by Tijuana's political and business elite. The raid happened just as the staff was closing after a private event. Agents found 3 cartel coordinators in a back office counting cash and reviewing shipping manifests. They also found something unexpected: a hidden server room behind a false wall in the kitchen storage area. The servers were running encrypted communication software, financial tracking programs, and real-time route management systems for drug convoys moving through the San Diego corridor. When federal cyber forensic specialists later accessed the data, they would discover the digital skeleton of the entire operation. Every bribe, every shipment, every compromised official, and every decision that Mayor Villarreal had signed off on to keep the empire running. By 6:30 a.m., the first phase of Operation Iron Curtain had secured 15 primary locations, arrested 63 individuals, and seized narcotics with a combined street value exceeding $600 million. But the operation was just beginning, because what agents found in those servers revealed a network so deeply embedded in Tijuana's government and law enforcement infrastructure that dismantling it would require not just arrests, but institutional reconstruction. Inside a climate-controlled federal analysis facility in San Diego, a team of intelligence analysts worked through the seized hard drives and servers with the methodical intensity of archaeologists excavating a buried city. They bypassed military-grade encryption, cracked password-protected files, and began piecing together what the FBI would later classify as Operation Phantom Gate. That was the cartel's internal code name for the systematic infiltration and weaponization of Tijuana's municipal government. The network diagram that emerged on their monitors looked like the circulatory system of a living organism. At the center was Mayor Villarreal. Radiating outward were shell corporations, ghost payroll accounts, offshore banking channels, and fake nonprofits that existed only on paper but had moved hundreds of millions of dollars across borders over an 8-year period. There were logistics companies that operated trucks but carried no legitimate cargo, agricultural cooperatives that imported fertilizer but ran fentanyl production, real estate holding companies that owned properties used exclusively for cartel storage, safe houses, and human trafficking stash points. But the most disturbing discovery was the depth of law enforcement corruption. The servers contained encrypted communications between Mayor Villarreal and senior officers in the Tijuana Municipal Police. Instructions to pull patrol units from specific districts during scheduled convoy movements, orders to delay response times to certain addresses, payments coded as overtime bonuses but matched exactly to dates when drug shipments crossed the border without interdiction. One file contained a complete roster of compromised officers, and for 83 names, ranks ranging from street patrol to deputy chiefs. Each had received monthly payments between $5,000 and $30,000, depending on their role and access level. Analysts found patrol logs that had been falsified, incident reports that were never filed, and surveillance footage that had been deliberately erased. They found evidence that the mayor's office had installed its own surveillance network throughout the city, separate from official police systems designed to monitor federal agents, track rival cartel movements, and protect the Tijuana cartel's logistics operations. This was not corruption in the traditional sense. This was the construction of a parallel enforcement apparatus, a shadow police force that answered not to the people of Tijuana, but to the narcotics empire that had purchased their loyalty. One senior FBI analyst, a veteran of organized crime investigations named Robert Chen, sat back from his monitor and said what everyone in the room was thinking. This is not a cartel using a city. This is a cartel that bought a city and turned it into a logistics platform, and the mayor was not just complicit. He was the operations manager. The financial trail was equally staggering. Forensic accountants traced the flow of the $220 million in disaster relief funds through 14 shell companies and 6 international banks before landing in accounts controlled by the mayor and his cartel partners. The scheme was elegant in its simplicity. Contracts for reconstruction projects were awarded to companies that existed only on paper. Those companies submitted invoices for work that was never performed. Payments were approved by municipal officials on the cartel payroll. The money was then laundered through legitimate businesses, converted into cryptocurrency, moved offshore, and eventually returned as cash to fund cartel operations, payoffs, and infrastructure. But there was more. Hidden in the deepest layers of the encrypted servers was a file labeled Expansion Protocol. It outlined a 5-year plan to replicate the Tijuana model in other border cities. Identify vulnerable municipal elections, fund compliant candidates, build networks of compromised officials before they even took office, create legal frameworks that allowed cartel operations to function behind the facade of legitimate governance. The Tijuana operation was not an endpoint. It was a proof of concept, and if Operation Iron Curtain had not intervened, that blueprint was set to be deployed across the entire US-Mexico border region within 18 months. At 7:15 a.m., as the sun finally burned through the fog and lit up the hills of Tijuana, a second wave of coordinated raids began. This phase was broader, more aggressive, and designed to dismantle the infrastructure that supported the mayor's empire. Over 400 federal agents, supported by Mexican military units, moved simultaneously on 32 locations across Baja California. They hit cartel-owned businesses in the commercial district, bars, nightclubs, and restaurants that served as money laundering fronts and meeting points for logistics coordinators. Agents seized cash registers stuffed with bills, ledgers written in code, and safes containing jewelry, gold, and stacks of American currency. At one nightclub, they found a hidden basement where cartel members held meetings at tables surrounded by armed guards. The walls were lined with photographs of politicians, police chiefs, and judges. Each photo was labeled with a code indicating their level of cooperation and monthly payment. They raided a network of auto repair shops that specialized in modifying vehicles for drug smuggling. Mechanics had installed hidden compartments in fuel tanks, hollowed-out door panels, false floors beneath truck beds, and reinforced suspension systems designed to carry hundreds of kilograms of narcotics without detection. Federal agents seized 27 modified vehicles and arrested 11 mechanics who had been trained by cartel engineers specifically for this work. They shut down a series of migrant shelters that were operated by shell nonprofits linked to Mayor Villarreal's network. These facilities claimed to provide humanitarian aid to Central American migrants seeking asylum. In reality, they were sorting and recruiting centers. Migrants who could not pay smuggling fees were held and coerced into working for the cartel. Women were trafficked into prostitution networks. Men were forced to work as mules, carrying drug loads across the border. Children were separated and used as leverage to control their families. When agents entered these facilities, they found conditions that violated every standard of human dignity. Overcrowded rooms with no ventilation, inadequate food and water, armed guards who operated with impunity because municipal police had been ordered to treat the locations as off-limits. At 8:03 a.m., a specialized unit raided a compound on the outskirts of Tijuana that intelligence had identified as a fentanyl superlab. The facility was hidden inside what appeared to be an industrial chicken processing plant. The front sections of the building contained legitimate equipment, refrigeration units, and packaging lines. But in the back, behind steel doors that required electronic keycards to open, agents found a pharmaceutical-grade narcotics production operation. Chemists in lab coats worked at stations equipped with precision scales, hydraulic presses, and chemical mixing tanks. They were synthesizing fentanyl from precursor chemicals imported from Asia, pressing the powder into pills designed to mimic oxycodone, and packaging the finished product for distribution across the United States. The lab had the capacity to produce 500,000 fentanyl pills per day. Agents seized 2.3 million pills ready for shipment, 700 kilograms of raw fentanyl powder, and industrial quantities of binding agents and dyes. They also found detailed production logs showing output targets, quality control measures, and delivery schedules. The operation was not run by street-level criminals. It was managed like a legitimate pharmaceutical company, with shift schedules, safety protocols, and performance bonuses for chemists who exceeded production quotas. By noon, Operation Iron Curtain had arrested 147 individuals. He seized over $800 million in narcotics, dismantled 3 major production facilities, and recovered financial records that would take federal prosecutors months to fully analyze. But the human cost of the mayor's empire was still being calculated. Investigators found evidence linking the network to over 300 overdose deaths in San Diego County alone during the previous year. They found records of 78 women and children who had been trafficked through the migrant shelter system. They found communications showing that municipal ambulances had been delayed in responding to overdoses in certain neighborhoods because those areas were considered cartel-controlled zones where official services were not welcome. One FBI agent, a father of 3 who had worked border crimes for 15 years, stood in the ruins of the fentanyl super lab and tried to process the scale of what they had uncovered. He thought about the families in San Diego, in Phoenix, in Los Angeles, who had lost children to pills that looked like prescription medication but were actually poison-pressed in this facility. He thought about the parents in Central America who had sent their daughters north seeking safety, only to have them disappear into trafficking networks protected by a mayor who smiled in press conferences and cut ribbons at school openings. "This is what happens when power becomes invisible," he said to a colleague. "When corruption is so complete that it looks like governance. When a drug empire does not just coexist with government, it becomes the government." The final revelation came 3 days after the initial raids. Not when forensic analysts finished decrypting a set of files labeled political assets. These were not financial records or logistics plans. These were dossiers, detailed profiles of judges, legislators, business leaders, and law enforcement officials across the border region. Each file contained personal information, financial vulnerabilities, family details, and evidence of compromising behavior. Some had been bribed. Some had been blackmailed. Some had been coerced through threats against their families. And some, the files suggested, had simply been persuaded that cooperation was the smarter path. Mayor Villarreal had not built his empire through violence alone. He had built it through strategic infiltration, through understanding that the best way to control a system is to become indispensable to the people who run it. He provided campaign funding to politicians who would later owe him favors. He hired the children of police chiefs into lucrative positions. He donated to charities run by judges' spouses. He made himself a pillar of the community, someone who could not be touched without destabilizing the entire structure. And for 8 years, it worked. But systems built on secrets are fragile. They collapse the moment those secrets are exposed. And Operation Iron Curtain did more than expose secrets. It detonated them in public view, forcing institutions on both sides of the border to confront the reality that one of Mexico's major cities had been operating as a cartel logistics hub, with the full knowledge and participation of its elected leadership. The trials began 6 months later. Mayor Hector Villarreal faced 137 federal charges, including racketeering, money laundering, drug trafficking conspiracy, human trafficking conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and misappropriation of federal disaster relief funds. His defense argued that he was a political leader caught between impossible choices, that he had been coerced by cartel violence, that his actions were taken to protect his city. Federal prosecutors presented the encrypted communications, the financial records, the witness testimony from victims and cooperating cartel members. They showed the jury photographs of the $220 million stacked in his basement. They played audio recordings of him giving direct orders to delay police responses during drug convoy movements. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts, he was sentenced to life in federal prison without possibility of parole. 83 police officers were arrested, tried, and convicted on corruption charges. The entire command structure of the Tijuana Municipal Police was replaced. New leadership was brought in from federal agencies, tasked with rebuilding a force that had been systemically compromised. Community policing programs were established, transparency measures were implemented, and a joint U.S.-Mexico task force was created to monitor border security and prevent future infiltration. The $220 million in recovered disaster relief funds were placed in a secured account, audited by international oversight committees, and redistributed through verified channels to the communities that had been defrauded. Their homes were finally rebuilt. Water systems were repaired. Schools received the funding that had been stolen. It was not enough to undo the damage, but it was a start. The fentanyl seized during Operation Iron Curtain represented approximately 6 million potential lethal doses. 6 million lives that would not be ended by pills produced in that lab. But investigators knew that other labs existed. Other production facilities were operating in places they had not yet identified. The fight against the cartel infrastructure was not over. It would never be over. It was a permanent conflict that required constant vigilance, constant adaptation, and constant sacrifice from the men and women who chose to stand against it. This story is a warning, not about cartels, though they are real and dangerous, not about drugs, though they destroy lives and communities. This story is a warning about the vulnerability of democratic systems when power is concentrated, when oversight fails, when citizens assume that elected officials operate in good faith simply because they hold a title. Mayor Villarreal did not seize power through a coup. He was elected. He was welcomed into office by voters who believed his promises, and he used that legitimacy to build an empire that poisoned two nations. That is the most frightening lesson of Operation Iron Curtain, that corruption does not always announce itself with violence and chaos. Sometimes it arrives in a suit and tie, with a warm smile and a compelling speech about community values. Power does not always need guns. Sometimes it only needs silence and ambition, and the willingness to look the other way while others suffer. If you're still watching this, if this story has shaken you the way it should, tap like so more people understand how deep infiltration can go. Comment expose if you believe these stories need to be told. Share this with someone who needs to understand that the most dangerous threats are the ones that operate behind legitimate facades.